in mountaineering, you've got this death zone, right? Which is like the 8,000 meters and above. And it's so the highest mountain in the world in Nepal and so on. That's the point where the climber's body just starts to break down physically. There's not enough oxygen. The altitude's really low. Altitude's really high. So the air's thin and it's really, really cold. And so if they're going to succeed in getting to the summit, they have to get through this death zone and back down critically, back to below that 8,000 meters before they die. And unfortunately, they don't often. They don't manage to do that. And it occurred to me that when reading about this, it feels a little bit like a photography business or any small business.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 381 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I had an insightful conversation with wedding photographer Nick Church. Nick and I discussed the challenges of overcoming what he refers to as the death zone in photography businesses, as well as some hilarious stories about his time spent in said death zone. You won't want to miss out on our chat as it's really fun. After listening, be sure to head on over to patreon.com/fstop and listen and weigh in on your thoughts about the episode. Each week I prepare some questions to generate some conversation on Patreon, and joining is free. Just find a link in the show notes. Okay, see you there. All right, let's get to this week's conversation with Nick Church. All right, Nick Church, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Matt. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. When you reached out originally with all these great ideas you have, I was really excited, and I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, Nick, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about who Nick Church is?
Yeah, well, I am based in Bristol, which is in the UK, in the southwest of the UK. And so it's about 130 miles west of London. So my name's Nick Church. I run Nick Church Photography, where I specialize in wedding photography, commercial photography, and also a suite of training programs on photography, a bit of landscape stuff as well, but more often the business side of photography. And that's kind of where I've ended up as a niche, really, in terms of the training stuff.
Awesome. And yeah, I would say for people who are like, I have zero interest in monetizing my photography, I'm just going to back out of this now, I would say, hold up, pause. There's going to be a lot of interesting insights that we're going to talk about here that are going to apply to you, even if you have no interest in monetizing your imagery. So,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And then married, kids, how's that work out for you?
Yeah. Got a long-term partner, so we're engaged. Because I'm a wedding photographer, the thought of thinking about my own wedding is just too much. So we've been engaged for sort of like 14 years. We've got, between us, got 4 kids. I've got 2 from a previous marriage and she's got 2 from a previous marriage, all boys, all 19, 20 and 21. So, you know, it's a pretty hectic household when they're all together.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's awesome. Well, cool. So let's kick this off by having you tell us about your photography journey, which apparently started not that long ago.
That's right. Yeah, not long ago at all, really. Although every time I talk about it, it gets a bit longer. So, as things tend to go. But I had a career in the software industry. So I started as a software engineer, and then a project manager, program manager, and then went into senior management roles. And photography just wasn't a part of my life at all. I always needed a creative outlet in some way. So that was either music or art. I used to do pen and ink drawings, which used to take an awful long time to do. But it was just nice to do something creative when you've got a fairly dry day job, you know, sort of looking at spreadsheets and proposals and project plans and bunches of code and things like that. So it was about end of 2014, early 2015. I thought, I'm just going to get a camera. Just suddenly had a thought about doing that. Never really considered it before, and became hooked, like, you know, instantly, just hooked on photography. And so I had this really busy job, but I didn't have loads and loads of time to throw into photography. So I just use every opportunity I had, like walking to and from work, just take the camera everywhere I went and just be snapping shots that I thought would be really nice. And just things grew and grew. And I got to a point where I had quite a nice portfolio of images, mostly around Bristol. And I was sharing those online and people seemed to like them. So I was exhibiting those in a local art fair. And a woman came up and she wanted one of the prints that I had on display. She was looking for money to pay for the print, and said, she mentioned she was getting married and said, did I shoot weddings? And in my head, I was really clear. So obviously not. Didn't have the kit. I don't have the time or the experience, but then my mouth completely let me down and I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. And then, so I ended up as a wedding photographer by mistake almost.
That's amazing, Nick. Yeah, it's funny you said that because back in, I want to say 2011, I was mostly into like photographing mountains and, big scenes from the tops of peaks here in Colorado. And my wife's brother was getting married and they're like, well, you are super into photography. Why don't you photograph our wedding? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And of course I had like a kit lens, I didn't have any primes. And it was an indoor wedding in a church, like really dark. And I was like, oh my God, I was way over my head, bro. Way over my head.
At the deep end.
yeah. But it was
and
humbling.
Did you find you can't really be a photographer and a guest, can you? I think it happens a lot, and you realize that you end up not having time to take enough pictures, and also you have a really rubbish time at the wedding because you're worried about not taking enough pictures all the time.
Oh, 100%. And, because of my equipment and my lack of experience, I got some okay images, but I was like, wow, this wasn't great. So I learned really quick that weddings requires a lot more than you might think.
Yeah, it's interesting, different set of skills, isn't it? It's not, I think the clinical, technical photography aspect is probably less important than being able to shoot really quickly and spot things and just think outside the box and make sure you've got lists of shots that you've been given beforehand and you don't have as much time, certainly initially, to think, right, how can I be really creative with this shot? And that does come later on. I found that after a while, when all of those things I've mentioned become, you can do it on autopilot, then you can start to think, I can see a bit of a shot coming up here. I'm going to try and do something a bit more creative.
Yeah, 100%. What I found, because I've photographed a few weddings since then, I don't know, I want to say like maybe 5 or 6 total in the course of a decade. But, as you gain skills in photography in general and learn your camera and learn settings and all that fun stuff, like that stuff becomes second nature, which I think is even more important in wedding photography than it is in landscape photography. And then you have the opportunity to pursue those creative ideas and concepts. And like you said, the moment becomes much more important to recognize and capture than perhaps those technical aspects. And, there's a little bit more leeway for composition to be a little bit more messy and things like that. But
exactly. Yeah, because they're looking for different stuff, aren't they? I've always said that a bride and a groom, when they look at, like if you come back from a mountain in Colorado, if you got back into Lightroom and Photoshop and saw that, the focus had been slightly missed, you'd be devastated. Whereas on a wedding, people aren't looking at that stuff. They're looking at whether they're fat or whether their beard looks fantastic or whatever it might be. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So you accidentally became a wedding photographer. What happened then? Because now you're doing photography full time, and this is like 9 years ago now. So what was that transition period like for you?
It was tough because the kids were, what was that now? So we're looking at, 8 years. So they were still young enough that they were old enough that they just wanted to be gaming in their rooms all the time. But they were young enough that you couldn't just leave them to do that all weekend. So it was busy. And the career that I'd worked for 15 years at, and sort of progressed through his career, that was going really well as well. And so I was in this sort of difficult situation where I just didn't really, it sort of came along by accident, as I said. And what happens with, as you know, with weddings, the gap between taking a booking and actually having to get off your backside and shoot the wedding is really long. So you can almost think, these booking fees are great. I can buy a new lens and all these sorts of things. And then a year later, it's like, right, I've got to actually shoot these weddings now. And that's like a silent assassin that comes in and suddenly think, how am I going to do this? How have I got time to do this? So it was a couple of years of a lot of, I mean, it sounds like a really nice problem to have, but I was lucky enough to travel a lot around the world with my job. But I was editing from flights. If there was anything where I was sitting still for more than an hour, then laptop would be open and I'd be editing weddings, airport lounges, everything else. So it was trying to run the two together for a while until I thought, right, I've got to decide now which way I go. Do I just stop marketing for new weddings, shoot these ones and just let it drift away? Or do I just lean into it and just make the leap into that full time?
You said it's a good problem to have, but it's also incredibly stressful because you're being pulled in two directions. Well, probably 3 or 4 directions. I know when I was evaluating that, like a year and a half ago, I had a full-time job. It was going fine. I had pretty much mastered everything I needed to do in my job. So it was kind of on autopilot, but I still had to show up and I still had to perform and I still had heaps and heaps and heaps of responsibility at that job. And I was running all these photography projects and trying to do all these photography business things. And it's like, you can't do them all well.
What was the job you had, Matt, before? What was your career?
Yeah, so I was working in a nonprofit that provided services to adults with developmental disabilities. And so we were operating a residential program that was, open 24/7, 365. And so we had about 20 to 30 clients at any given time that we were responsible for. And I had, probably 15 contractors where these clients would live in people's homes, kind of like foster care. Mm-hmm. And then all of these state regulations that are that we had to follow and had to make sure that those people followed. And then all these crises would constantly pop up, like people would get COVID or they'd die or like all kinds of, life happens to people. And, we were in the business of caring for people 24/7. And so very stressful.
And a lot of stuff there that's completely outside your control, right? I mean, it's like we always call it a 9 to 5, but a job like I had is never 9 to 5, is it? Because you're suddenly there's a crisis and suddenly that's an all weekender. So that's gone. There's emails in the morning, conference calls late at night or meetings late at night. And it just stretches into your whole life anyway, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. And like we would have on-call schedules and, I'd get calls at 2-3 in the morning, like so-and-so's in the hospital. I need someone to come watch these other clients for me. Like you're very stressful. Yeah.
Yeah. Tough.
Yeah. So what was it that kind of pushed you across the line in terms of making the switch?
I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think as we get more mature as a photography business, you still try and remain emotionally invested in all of your clients, whether it's commercial, a wedding couple or someone buying artwork. You try and keep that link. But after a while, it is ultimately a business. And so, but in those days, it was very much, I can't let these couples down. So I didn't even consider just handing over these weddings to another photographer, either for free or, working an associate model. I just get someone in to shoot them for me. It just didn't cross my mind because I figured that would be letting them down, which it still would have been. But it was something that I still would have felt like I'd let them down, but it would be something now I would at least consider. So I wasn't considering that. But also, I think certainly in my career, when I started, I loved it, right? When I first graduated in software engineering, we worked on, the first time working in a company, projects were exciting. It was just a really dynamic place to work. And then as I ended up going through sort of successfully higher chains of management, you start loving it less and less to the point you're not doing any of the things that I liked about it. I was no longer doing any design. I used to work in the digital TV software industry, so designing kind of apps and program guides on your TV and things like that. Didn't do any of that stuff. It was just recruiting new people, firing people, doing project proposals. So I thought, well, I don't mind my job. It's well paid, but I don't love it. And I had a feeling that when I had a wedding coming up, I was nervous and anxious and all those things that we get with something like that. But I just loved it. I loved the feeling during and afterwards and that buzz of it all. And I thought, if I'm, not a spring chicken, I'm 49 now. Just when you get to my age, you have to think twice about it, how big it actually is. So 49. I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger. If I'm going to do something like this, I need to do it now. This is the time to do it. I could always go back to software and, go back to project management later if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the excitement and kind of, almost like those nerves hitting you and the thrill of going to the wedding, photographing the wedding, capturing the images and like seeing the end result and like all of the things that are wrapped up in those aspects of being a full-time photographer. But I'm curious, what else about photography made you fall in love with it?
I think it was because it was primarily weddings at the time and some prints as well, some prints of artwork. It was getting that direct feedback. So if you did something that that feeling of when you've got a shot in the camera and you cannot wait to get back and edit it because you know that whoever that's going to end up with, whether it's on someone's wall, they're just going to love it. It's such an exciting feeling. And to capture someone's wedding, for example, in images that they just love themselves in, and it becomes like a bit of an heirloom for their family, whether it's an album or digital prints or, digital or prints, then that's just a really nice feeling. And for me, because I'd always had this creative part to me, then being able to just, being able to live a life as a creative was something that I didn't even imagine was possible. And that's, to this day, is something that makes me wake up just eager to get to work, just can't wait to get to work. And the downside of that is that you can end up working ridiculously long hours because you love it. You've gone back to loving it, which means it's really long. With that, I think the other thing that I really loved about it was when you do something that you're really proud of with photography, you get instant feedback, and it's you can really pat yourself on the back and say, I absolutely nailed that shoot. I'm really happy with it. You might have things you can improve next time, but you've got something that you're super proud of. And I thought, I wonder how often most of us in our normal jobs get feedback like that. Normally, the reward is you just don't get fired. Or you might get a small pay rise. Some of the best managers might make you feel like you've done a good job, but it's always part of a team, And I also like, bizarrely, the other side of it, whereas if you mess something up, which we all do, then you've only got yourself, it's not because there's someone else in the team that's let the side down, it's just on you, and that's for you to improve and make sure you're always getting better.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but one thing I love/hate about being a full-time photographer is that all of the responsibility is on your shoulders, right? Like that's kind of exciting because you have all of the freedom in the world to pursue all types of different marketing ideas, to pursue different concepts for improving your business model, whatever. And that means that you're responsible for those things too, which means you could have catastrophic failure.
Well, that's right. I mean, yeah, I agree with you that you've got ability to think, I've just got this great idea and I can now actually implement it. Whereas we very rarely get, unless you're at the absolute top of it, own a larger company, you can do that, but then you're risking everyone's, you're risking the whole company if you do that. But you can just take a punt on something and give it a go. But do you find, Matt, sometimes when you get those ideas, you've got to be really careful because there's like this philosophy that the latest ideas in our mind become the best idea we've ever had. Then over time, it gradually goes down. And if you just jump on it right away, you end up sometimes before you've even finished it thinking, actually, I'm not sure this was such a good idea after all
the time. I mean, I have so many ideas, and that's good and bad because I have lots and lots of ideas that I'm like, oh, that would be really cool. But because I have all those ideas, I have a lot of time to like reflect on whether or not it's actually a good idea.
Yeah. It's fun wait until the next day can be quite handy. Just because if it's a good idea today, tomorrow it's still going to be decent. But if you wake up and think, yeah, I'm not going to do that, then probably it will keep dropping down the list until you never do it.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about you, but like my largest constraint is just time. Like I have lots and lots of ideas. I haven't reached the point of scale yet where I can afford to just hire people to work on stuff for me. Like I still edit every podcast episode myself. I still do all the social media for the podcast myself. I mean, everything is just me, like solopreneur, as you call it, right? So that's hard because you're limited literally by the number of minutes that are on the clock in any given day.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it is tough to grab. I always think it's like a dentist. or anything. You could, or a lawyer. You'd be really well paid, but they're still limited by the number of hours they can fit in a day to build clients. And then if you scale up a business, so you do have other people, which I have considered, and I did a couple of years ago when, post COVID, we had no weddings at all in 2020 virtually, apart from very tiny ones, very few in 2021. 2022 was ridiculously busy. So I did about 65, 70 weddings in 2022.
Ooh.
Had to get other shooters in to come and shoot some of these weddings for me, because there were several that ended up falling on the same day. And while it was good to be so busy, I thought, I'm managing a small team here. You have the problems you do get with managing a team. Like some people a few days before would say they couldn't make it. And it's like, oh man, I had a real feeling for the first time since I left my previous job. I've got those same feelings of, oh, this is not what I wanted to do. So having it back on yourself has got the advantage that at least you're reliable, and you can rely on yourself.
Right. And in photography, especially, I feel like it's really difficult to reach that point of scaling your business to where you can even afford to think about hiring other people to do the work for you. I mean, unless you're consistently making, I'm just going to throw a random number out, but let's say making like $10,000 to $20,000 a month on like YouTube or something like that, or even weddings or whatever, like until you have that consistency, it doesn't really make a ton of sense, because you're just flushing money down the toilet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm not entirely sure how it works in the US with the RS, and sales tax and so on. But in the UK, after your business brings in, not profit, just brings in through the door. They've just increased. I think it's £90,000, about so what, $120,000, $120,000. Once it's at that level, you have to pay sales tax on everything. So it's suddenly, you can go £1 over that, it's 20% off everything. So you lose 20%. So it's this associate model of trying to grow your business really hurts, because you start shooting more things, get other people in to help shoot, but then you go above that, then you lose 20%. And it makes it very tough.
Yeah, I've got a couple of my close colleagues who live in the UK who are up against that all the time. Like, if I want to have them work on a project with me and give them a little bit of money, I'm like, is this going to put you over the VAT threshold, or are we good? Because It's ridiculous. I mean, that's just a crazy model that I think it just stifles growth. I mean,
well, but lots of people, it does, because lots of people just artificially keep their businesses under that level, and that's not great for the economy or the local area, because we're spending all of that money locally, and it just seems crazy that it's not some sort of sliding scale. I'm guessing that would just be too hard to administer. Anything like that. I mean,
in the United States, it's more on like there's tiers. So like if you're, and it's not really that aggressive. I mean, it used to be much more aggressive. Like back in I want to say like in the 30s and 40s, it was like if you were over $1 million, it was like 80% tax or something like that. But now I think the max is like 40 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'll never hit it, but you know what I mean? So yeah, it's a little bit better in that regard in the United States for sure.
So are you never curious about how it would work if you did outsource editing? Because we're always, because it's the value of time, isn't it, rather than because all of our time is limited. So the theory being, what could you do with that time? What is the value in that time that you would save?
I've actually looked into it, but like the cost of outsourcing it, even if I were to use a firm in like Singapore or something like that, it's still pretty high. And at the end of the day, the amount of effort it would take in terms of like uploading and sending them files, approving things, making sure they had all of the media that's associated, you end up spending like you're only saving like half the amount of time. So it's like, and you lose all the control. So for me, it's just like, it's not worth it yet. Again, if I was making, I don't know, I'm just going to throw out a number. Like if I was making like $5,000 a month on the podcast, yeah, I would totally do it, but it's just not there. So
yeah, it's something that I did. I mean, I probably 3 years ago, maybe a bit more, when I had a point where I had, because the thing with big shoots like weddings or events or things like that is that you think, well, I've just done that one, and you kind of forget about it for a while. But what you forget about is it's just joining the queue of loads of others. And I ended up in about October of one year thinking I've got 30 weddings to edit, and I thought I've got it. It was so stressful. And I thought this is really, every time I relaxed in any way, sort of just watch a sitcom for half an hour, I'd be thinking I should be editing that wedding. So to be able to outsource it was a weight off my shoulders. I think I do agree with you that you do release control in that way, and keeping a lid on the quality is very difficult after that. I think you do have to make sure that that's something that you might be prepared to compromise a little bit on, because ultimately it's going to be difficult for an outsourced editor to be able to see exactly the same vision that you would have if you did it yourself, and you just find someone that's got a close enough to be able to do a good enough job on it.
And I think for weddings, it pencils out, right? I mean, I don't know what you charge for weddings, but I'm just going to guess that it's a decent amount of money, and you can probably afford to throw 15 to 20% of that income at someone who can edit it for you, which is going to free up enough time for you to be able to shoot a whole other wedding. So it's like, it makes sense in terms of the math. But when you're a landscape photographer and you're only editing 15, 20, maybe 100 images max from a week-long shoot, it just doesn't make sense, right?
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Although you say about the cost of weddings, I think the market's so different between the US and UK. You must have come across this when you're talking to UK-based photographers, that you see some of the package prices of US-based weddings, events, family photographers, it's like, right, packing my bags right now. I got my passport. I'm coming over.
Yeah, and I wonder if the cost of living is commensurate, because I hear that a lot from people in the UK as well.
Yeah, I think it's hard to it's unfair to compare just the pricing, because, like you say, it's a different economy. We don't have to have healthcare insurance, for example.
Right.
Some of us do. Some of us have additional healthcare insurance, but there's lots of things that we don't. They are provided, so it's hard to judge it like for like.
Yeah, totally. So you were talking a minute ago about having 30 weddings to edit and things like that. Is that kind of what you were referring to in our correspondence as the death zone?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a contributing factor, because like you just said, that because our time's limited, when the death zone is this idea that, because I'm into mountaineering, not as an activity myself. I'm like, mountaineers need to be light and strong, and I'm kind of the opposite. So it's not something I do myself, but I am fascinated by it. And in mountaineering, you've got this death zone, right, which is like the 8,000 meters and above, and it's the highest mountains in the world in Nepal and so on. That's the point where the climber's body just starts to break down physically. There's not enough oxygen. The altitude's really low, altitude's really high, so the air's thin and it's really, really cold. And so if they're going to succeed in getting to the summit, they have to get through this death zone and back down critically, back to below that 8,000 meters before they die. And unfortunately, they don't manage to do that. And it occurred to me that when reading about this, it feels a little bit like a photography business, or any small business really, that's got a full-time job, but full-time job could be childcare responsibility, something that just has a fixed occupation of your time. It doesn't flex, that you're limited. And so when we start, it's great. The progress sort of goes up nice and straight. Going, wow, this is going great. And then we reach the point, and the death zone sort of, if you imagine a graph of a top line as being what you would need to earn from photography if you were going to make the leap into full-time photographer. So that's your summit, if you like. Then below that, you've got this line where above which things get really tight, where you just don't have enough time, you don't have the energy all the time to do a good job. Now, what happens under that line, our photography increases really nicely, and then as we go past that line, it starts to tail off because we run out of time to put in the same level of effort. Now, it's the death zone because it's really hard to get out of it, because our performance tails off. We're not yet at the limit where we could leave our day job, so we're stuck in this death zone. We don't have time. So our photography, that's one of the most frustrating things about it. You've got this new passionate business, and you just can't put the same level of effort or creativity you used to put in. So occasional bookings come along, before you reach that point, you can handle them really effectively and professionally and meet people and head off and just go meet them because you can use all your free time up. And when you shoot the day, you've had a bit of time beforehand to plan how you're going to do a really good job. But then when you've got lots of them, suddenly you can't do that and the cracks start to show. And the other downside is, like we said earlier, a job isn't 9 to 5. So your day job used to get all of that time you spent doing that, and now it's getting none of it. So you risk actually not performing very well in your day job. And so you're in this, you're kind of getting crushed from all areas, and it's really hard to get out. And I had the reason this whole idea came to me, and I knew I was right in the death zone, was, I did have loads of weddings to edit, which were backing up. But I was in a conference call, and I was managing this conference call, and it was with some clients of ours, some in San Diego, we had some in Mumbai, and it was from a company who we provided software for, and the project I was running was way behind, so they were losing tens of thousands of dollars every day, so they were not happy. So it was super stressful. My bosses had flown in to be in the conference call, and I could just feel them sort of gazing inside my head, watching every move I made. It was such a stress. I was already I was about to have a heart attack anyway. And then I felt my phone vibrating. So someone was phoning. I just ignored it. Then they resorted to texting me, which came up on my laptop screen, and it was from a wedding photography client. And the message said, "Hi, Nick, we're getting a bit worried. We're at the venue. Are you on your way?" And I was like, oh my goodness. I thought, what's going on? And I didn't even know who it was. I just had a number. And so I went absolutely pale. People on the call were saying, "Are you all right?" And I thought, man, I thought, right, this is now at a point where I have to decide I can't keep doing this. I'm making a real mess of everything here.
Wow. So how did that resolve?
Well, it turned out I managed to. I just said, I just need 5 minutes. So I just grabbed my laptop and I went off to the kitchen. I was just furiously going through my emails, just trying to find this phone number to see if I could link it up. Turned out it wasn't their wedding. It was a visit of the venue, which so initially I thought, oh, thank God for that. I've survived it. But then I remembered now it all came back to me because I hadn't had time to write it down. So I thought I meant to write this in my diary. I hadn't done it. They'd gone to the church. The vicar was there. Their family was there. They wanted me there to do a whole rehearsal. So they'd taken time off work. So it was still a really bad thing. But I didn't miss the wedding. But the thing that client will remember from that shoot, I did a good job photography-wise. I was really happy with it. But that's all they'll take away is, that was the guy that forgot to turn up. And that's the thing that they'll go with them. And that's a load of referrals gone straight away, which when you're starting out is so valuable to have these referrals.
Right. So what did you end up doing as a result of that experience?
Well, that was when I thought, I've got to decide. I can't keep doing these too high pressure situations. So I also knew I needed a better mechanism to actually manage all these things. So I got some studio management software from a company called Light Blue Software based in the UK that would manage all of my bookings and manage a lot of those workflows for me, so I wasn't just forgetting things, because things were I had a Google spreadsheet, a Google calendar, and there's lots of manual steps in between, and just the cracks, things were just falling through cracks left, right, and center.
So I understand that you have developed a bit of an exercise to help people try to realize whether or not they're in the death zone, or maybe how to avoid the death zone. What is your exercise that you've developed?
Well, in terms of the death zone, it depends on what your job is. I mean, you had a completely different career to mine, but it had all the same traits of making a day job that's very hard to escape from, in terms of having these two together, because so some jobs do tax your time much more heavily than others. And mine did, yours did. But even it doesn't matter what job you're doing. If you're a bar worker or a waitress or whatever it might be, those jobs in a way are harder than my job was, because in my job, sure, it was demanding and stressful, but there was bits of time where I was sat at my desk and I could think, I'm just going to respond to an inquiry. If you're doing a job like a doctor or a nurse or bar work, it's full on. There's no way you can do anything else other than that job. So there's these pressure points all the time. So if you think about that graph again, there's only really three ways to get out of it, which is you have to pull that top line down, which is to work out a way you can reduce your expected income. So you've got to look at what ways can we reduce that, and so that means, can you go down to maybe a day less, or a less demanding role, or is there savings you rely on? I managed to negotiate. I changed jobs about the same time for a different reason. And I managed to negotiate. I thought, right, if I'm changing jobs, I need to do 4 days. I can't do 5 days. So I carved out a Friday where I could at least put a lot of photography stuff in, and that really was just a real pressure relief. So that worked for me. The other thing to bear in mind is when you are earning a side income from photography, then what you mustn't do is do something stupid like go and buy a motorbike with it, right? Because that make you an idiot, and that's exactly what my partner said. So that's what Dawn said when I rode one home the first time. So you must definitely don't do what I did, because if you can save that money, that's going to bring that top line down. That's reserves you can eat into and get out of that day job sooner. The other thing is push that bottom line up. And that means, because by pushing it up, by reducing the tax that you're, by fewer hours or whatever, then you get that progress straight for longer, which means you've got a better trajectory to get past towards where you need to be. And the other thing is to straighten that curve off. As we said, it levels out because our time runs out and our creativity and energy runs out. So use marketing strategies that don't need effort, or critically can get bookings quicker than you can shoot them, like Facebook ads or any social media ads, Google ads, SEO on your website. All of these things are really good things, because once you set them up, they're creating bookings without you having to do anything. Yeah, it takes cost, but then you're earning from photography, so you kind of reinvest some of that money. Mm-hmm. And that straightening that curve up can get you straight out quite quickly. And that's the trick to be able to get out of that, because it's not a pleasant sometimes. That's why I'm sure that's why so many photographers that are determined just to have a nice side gig just can't do it for long, because actually it's really wearing over time, and after a while you just can't keep it up. And so getting out, that's a really good thing to be able to do. With the other really interesting exercise is with businesses that are not performing as they want to, because that's another reason why sometimes we can't just quite get it far enough, is to look at what your goals of the business are. And so many people that come to me for coaching have not really articulated what their own goals are for their business. What do they need to achieve? And so by listing those out, we've got a whiteboard over here. We just list them out. What they absolutely have to achieve. All the things, if they don't achieve any of them, that they have to achieve all of them. Otherwise, it's been a massive failure. And so it might be like, I need to be able to sell 50 prints in a year, or I might need to do 30 weddings or earn $20,000, whatever it might be. Have that. And then we just list, right, what do you do in an average week? So we list that on the other side of the whiteboard. And this is where we come onto editing, because it's normally things like shooting, editing, some vague social media, looking at camera lenses online. That's what we all do. We all spend hours and hours doing that.
Go down the YouTube rabbit hole.
oh, tell me about it. I invest. I've decided I wanted to get a better landscape photography lens. I must have put in about 3 days of researching. I found one because I've got a Sony system, found a lovely landscape lens, but it didn't have a screw filter things. I was looking at different filters. Oh man, I probably used it about twice for landscape photography. Anyway, so you list all these things, and then we just match them up. We just do an exercise of just drawing, right, how much does that contribute towards those goals out of 0 to 5, say? And you find the same every single time with businesses that aren't performing as you want to, that the things you're spending your time doing just are not contributing at all. And then you look at the things you're not doing, like SEO, Facebook ads, targeted social media, networking with venues, art galleries, whatever it is, the genre of photography, businesses, if it's commercial photography, networking, get your name out there. That's the stuff that directly gives you a 5-star contribution to those goals, but we don't do them. And that's the problem. We're just doing the wrong things all the time.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think the other tricky thing with that too is that, and I'm going to use social media as an example, but a lot of times people think what they're doing is contributing to what those goals are, but they haven't thought through how to actually measure that. For example, if you're spending, 10 hours, 15, 20 hours a week on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, whatever, and you're pumping out content and all of that kind of stuff, and you're putting all this energy into making sure that you're posting once a day and you have reels and all of these things, how are you measuring whether or not that actually is helping you reach the goals that you've set for yourself?
Exactly. Yeah. Because you've got to. We don't know, do we? And what will work for you won't work for me, and vice versa. So you've got to try everything, and stop doing the stuff that doesn't work. But if you don't know if it's working or not, then you just run out of time again.
Yeah, and the thing is, I learned this in my nonprofit world because I did a lot of quality improvement and all that fun stuff. But typically, we tend to improve upon the things that we measure, right? So a good example of that for me is for my landscape photography competition, I'm responsible for all of our marketing efforts. And, that includes social media, but that's a pretty low lift for me. But the main thing that I've done is different Facebook and Instagram ads. And the way that I measure whether or not those are effective or not is every single day. So my call to action is for people to sign up to our mailing list. And every single day I go in, I look at my ad spend, how much did I spend over the last 24 hours, and how many new subscribers to my mailing list did I get. And then I'm calculating those over time, and I'm calculating like the cost per subscriber. And that tells me whether or not the effort is worth it.
Yeah, well, that gives you such great metrics, doesn't it? For things like Facebook ads, you can tell straight away how much it's costing you to get each inquiry or each click or whatever it is that you're valuing as the metric that you're trying to chase.
And I think you can do that with all sorts of things, right? Like you talked a little bit about SEO, right? Like if you write an interesting blog post and it gets picked up on SEO somehow, and you're able to use Google Analytics or Google Webmaster Tools or whatever, and you're able to see, okay, that article is producing X number of hits for these search terms, and you have certain things on that page, like maybe directing people to a mailing list sign up, or maybe to book a call with you to book a wedding or whatever it is. Like you need to be able to measure the things that you're working on and whether or not they're actually producing results that are getting you to the goals that you've set for yourself. So I think what you just said is 100% correct.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, that people do. I'm always really interested in why do we work on the things? Because we know, most of us are intelligent. We know what we're working on is valuable or not. So you think, well, why do we work on those things? And the reasons like you work on the stuff that there's a metric against, because you can see the progress in your work. And we love seeing that, don't we? As people, we love seeing progress in what we're doing. So anything that shows us that direct feedback that we're making progress with that task, we work on. I think the other category of task that we throw loads of time at is things that we enjoy. So we love doing things that we enjoy rather than things we don't. And as busy people, like I'm busy, you're busy, everyone that's done in this podcast will be really busy. If you've got more things to do than you've got time to do, then you can get into this illusion of being flat out all day. And you think, well, I've been really productive, I've been flat out. But what you've actually done is choose what you've not done. You've chosen certain things over other things. And there's things like SEO that just aren't getting the attention they need. And the reason stuff like SEO doesn't get attention is because it's not enjoyable. And the reason it's not enjoyable is because it's hard to start. What does doing some SEO even mean for most of us that don't have an understanding of SEO? What does that mean, And so when things are hard to start, we just put them off until they're a bit clear. But when you work for yourself, they never get any clearer. They just sit there, So no manager's going to come and say, right, I've just clarified this a bit for you and described it. We just leave them sitting there.
Yeah, and I think for people who are listening, who are like, I don't have business goals in photography. Maybe my goals are, I want to get out and photograph more often, or I want to get into a little bit better physical conditions so that I can do longer hikes to get to places that I've always wanted to photograph. Or maybe your goal is to just become a better photographer and be happier with your images. I still think all of what we just discussed applies. Like if you set a goal to become a better photographer, however you want to measure that, which I think is also important. How do you want to measure that? Mm-hmm. Then you can start to line out different activities that help you accomplish that. Maybe it's studying a tutorial about a certain technique that you want to learn, or maybe it's going out once a week to practice a certain type of technique, whatever it is. Like if you can articulate it and measure it and actually write it down and connect it to the goals, I think that's going to get you a lot further than just throwing things out there and hoping something sticks.
Totally. And doing that exercise, whether it's business focused, whether it's improvement photography, or just creating more spectacular photos, whatever those goals are, once you've done that exercise, it means that you almost get for free afterwards everything you do. you start to think, oh, I wonder how this would match up if I did that exercise again. And you start thinking, hang on, I can now actually do something that I know is going to go straight to that. And it might be researching locations. You know, like you say, it might be the sort of photo locations. I'll spend an hour doing that. That's definitely going to get me to capturing some beautiful photo locations if that was one of the goals. And so articulating it does make a massive difference. And like that classic thing of, you know, yeah, sure, you can invest £2,000 in the highest end landscape lens for your camera system, or you could stick with what you've got and get a flight to Colorado or Canada or wherever, Grand Canyon, and then get better photos because it's not, you know, it's not in the same place. You go to Iceland for $2,000, you know. So that there are different ways of looking at it depending on what you want to achieve. And you see that in portrait photography and weddings all the time, of people throwing bokeh compared with other lenses, and no one cares. You know, wedding photography, no one cares. If it's as long as it's not a kit lens, you're fine. You know, do research that lens if you enjoy it, but do that with the knowledge that you're not actually achieving your goals. You're just doing it because you like it.
Right. Yeah. No. I fell into that trap for so many years. Like, oh, if I just buy that other lens or buy those filters, whatever it is, I'm going to become a better photographer. And that money could have been spent on so many trips, or, you know, like you said, maybe it's going to a conference where you can network with people and make connections in the industry, or whatever it is. Like, that's, again, connecting the goal with the activity, right?
Yeah, and I find exactly which is why one of the reasons I love doing, like, appearing on podcasts is I don't do enough networking. So it's, you know, speaking to you, a photographer with a complete different background, different geographic location, different genre of photography, you just pick up so many transferable little nuggets of really useful stuff. And going to conferences, which I do, but often it's in a speaking role, and you're focusing on that. You're not focusing on, right, let's just meet some people. Let's meet photographers and just find out how they approach certain shots and how they approach their work. And you come away with so much. Every time you do have a valuable conversation like that, you come away so much richer with knowledge. And it's crazy that I don't put more effort into actually doing that.
I know. I'm the same way. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about kind of why we should focus on the why versus the what when we articulate our passions to potential clients or customers.
I think it comes from that it's like the golden circle, that marketing methodology of people, effectively, to summarize it, people don't buy what we do. And that can be really depressing when most of our effort and love and passion has gone into what we're doing, but people aren't buying for that. They're normally buying why you do it, because otherwise all of our stuff looks the same. It's the same as going out and buying a tin of frankfurters. You just look at the price. They're all doing the same thing. But if you can articulate what you love about photography, and that can be, why do I love shooting weddings? What is it that gives me? You know, it can feel quite selfish, but it doesn't matter to feel selfish. Like, I just love being in an environment of happy people and capturing that and giving them something to cherish. If it's a landscape photography, it could be you just love the challenge of just getting up early and seeking that perfect sunrise and getting that perfect composition and never quite getting it perfect. And you love the fact that there's always a better shot around the corner, and, you know, putting such effort and love into it. Whatever it is, when people hear that, they're almost semi-emotionally purchasing your work without actually, you know, before you even start, before they see it, because there's a story behind it. And I think that's the reason you see in any genre, landscape photography. I mean, wow, looking at the landscape competition that you run, there's some absolutely stunning images there, breathtaking images. I've seen so many successful landscape photographers just in my general network of people that are not producing work anything like that, and they're doing really well as well. You know, they're doing really well regarded, and it's often you see it in all genres. I see there's wedding photographers that are really busy, and you look at their work and you think, well, technically, it's not great. You know, they're capturing. It's fine, but it's not great, and it's because they've been able to articulate why they're doing it, and that's more important. That's why being at wedding fairs and things like that are such a good opportunity, because you can get that passion across if you do it in the right way.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting when it comes to articulating our why, whether that's on an artist statement or in the social media posts that we create. I think that is one of the main ways that we can differentiate ourselves as artists or photographers or what, potential wedding photographer for somebody, I think that oftentimes is going to set you apart from other people in the field. And I think it's also going to show up in the type of work that you produce. I think people can start to see it if you focus on what your why is as a photographer and as an artist. I think that can go a long way. I mean, it's interesting because people are freaking out about AI and things like that. And what AI doesn't have that we have is purpose and those human qualities that are driving us forward. And I think the more effort we can put into communicating what makes us unique and different and human, the more likely we are to find success in this crowded field.
Absolutely, 100%. And landscape photography is a perfect example of this. That you could argue, and we don't want to go too deep into AI, that AI could recreate a mountainous scene really accurately, from scratch. And that's why the actual end product isn't the thing, because otherwise that would value someone that spent a week hiking to get 24 shots, the same as someone, a bit of AI that spent 30 seconds. They're not the same. And if you just look at the end result, they do look the same, or they look equivalent. And that isn't the case. It's because of the story and the process that's gone into that thing and the love that's gone into that first piece. And that's where the value is as well.
I totally agree. And if I was a photographer that created a lot of work that was easy to replicate using AI prompts, it probably would cause me to pause and think about how I can change my methodologies or the things that I'm capturing in a way that helps propel me or differentiate me from AI. Like, for example, this photograph behind me, I'm pretty sure AI could reproduce something very similar to that. I'm just saying it probably can. I've seen AI do some pretty cool stuff, and cool, by cool I mean a little bit scary and frightening. But at the same time, AI probably can't replicate a lot of the story that's behind that image. So I just think it's important to think about your why as an artist, and I'm glad that it's something that you wanted to talk about. So I'm curious, what are some other ways that we can do that? Like, how can we focus on the why? What does it look like?
I think it's where your passion is. It's what you, for me, it's what I think about when I think about taking photos and approaching a photo shoot or having an idea, a vision. It's what that makes me feel before I do it. And because that's the thing that's not there for AI, for example. And if somebody was like, you could live, like, so you could have a situation where there's two fairly equivalent photos. One person lives there and just takes out the window every day, whereas somebody has studied the area and traveled there. They've got a different backstory, and that's got different value. And unless you have that backstory, then, because that backstory is there, it's why, like, different types of art, you could have different types of, like, art with painting. Say there could be a very fine art that takes somebody 2 months to do the artwork, or somebody that splashes out and it takes them 10 minutes. They've got very vibrant, chaotic style. One isn't more valuable than the other because it's taken no time to do it. What was equivalent between those two is that's the passionate way that they approach their art, and that's what then comes through to the finished artwork. And so I always think about, what do I love about what makes me feel really passionate, and when I wake up, what's the first thing that makes me think about getting out of bed and going and shooting and running a business and whatever the shoot might be. The other thing is, if it's a wedding, why is it? Because weddings are pretty hard places to be sometimes. They're challenging. Nothing's in your control. So what is it I love about that? And things like that. Because if I can communicate that, then I know that those people are more likely to be investing in my backstory and the reasons I do it. Because especially with something like weddings and events and commercial photography, those people aren't photography experts. If someone buys a piece of artwork like you got behind you, then there's a much more aesthetic judgment going on about that work. If someone took a fairly crappy shot of some hills, some mountains, then they would be able to see this one's loads more beautiful in this one. Weddings and events and commercial and product photography isn't like that. People are just looking for, that's fine, so all of our work looks really similar. So unless you've got something to differentiate yourself, that's what they're going to buy into.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny because I feel like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago there was like this viral TikTok video of some wedding photographer where um, she was talking about how much money she charges for weddings, and then it was a pretty high number, like I want to say like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 or something like that, and then the photographs that she shared in the TikTok video, like you said, they were based, a very pedestrian wedding photography. It was like there wasn't anything about the imagery specifically that differentiated her. And I think that was a poignant reminder for me that people aren't necessarily buying the end result when it comes to weddings and portraits and family photo shoots and things like that. They're more purchasing like the experience, like how easy is this person to work with,
Exactly.
like how quickly can they turn around the images, are they going to respond to my emails and not like ghost me when we have a thing at the church or whatever.
Yeah, imagine doing that.
Right,
Imagine booking that photographer.
like those are the things that people are investing in when it comes to that type of photography. And I think when it comes to landscape photography, the ways that most people monetize that are either they're teaching in workshops or selling prints or selling tutorials or doing, videos. And so I think the same types of principles apply. Like if you're teaching workshops, how are you differentiating yourself as a workshop instructor, right? Like how much attention are you giving to each person? How much time are you spending getting to know them, not only as a photographer, but as a human being? How are you trying to help them realize their photography goals, whether that's to learn a technique or to photograph a certain type of scene, whatever that is. But, those are the things that people are going to pay extra money for, not like, oh, they got me to the location safely, right? Like that's the low bar, So to your point, I think no matter how you think about it, whether it's landscape, wedding, product, any type of photography you're trying to do, I think how you differentiate yourself is something you should be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, training courses are a really good example of that because there isn't anything. They may come away with notes from the session, and some photos, obviously, but they're not getting photography products from that. So that's not the thing that they're judging on. It's going to be all of those softer skill things. It can be things like when you're training someone, if you've got a different a variability of knowledge or experience in the group, then it can be tempting if you're an experienced photographer just to have lots of really getting deeper and deeper dive with the people and forgetting about the people that just need a bit more help. And what a lot of people take away from those sorts of things is, that trainer, she was really good at supporting the people that needed a bit of extra time, but she still made sure the other people had a bit of time as well. And things like for a wedding, the reviews you get for a wedding or commercial shoot are always, yeah, these images are fantastic. But in a way that they're just saying that because that's kind of what they expect. They've seen your portfolio, so they're expecting the same as what you've delivered before. It's the comments like, the photographer was really good with a few of the older people at the wedding. Or when you came to our workplace and did our headshots, we really liked that you minimised the effort and the fuss to disrupting of the business. We managed to carry on with our working day, and it's those sorts of things that are going to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those same lines, when it comes to selling our services or our goods, why is it that so many of us creative types are so bad at it?
Yeah, we often are. Do you think it's like that personal? It's because there's a personal involvement, there's an emotional investment that we put something emotional into that work. It's not just we've just not knocked together a dog kennel, which might have taken the same amount of time, but there's some love and attention gone into it. It's a creative thing. So whenever there's a creative thing, it is representing part of our character, and I think that makes it very. We feel quite disarmed when we're selling that, and we feel a bit exposed because we're kind of we are literally selling ourselves. We're not just saying, hey, do you want to buy this thing that I've got 10 of in the cupboard? We're saying this is something, this is part of me if we're doing it right. And so that does make it very difficult. And I do often find that that seems to be what makes us feel like, because we start to then get a bit too self-aware when we're trying to sell things. So that's when we start thinking, oh, man, all those panic mode anxieties and imposter syndrome kicks in about, oh, maybe I'm not, they've been silent for 2 seconds. Maybe I should offer a discount. Maybe they don't think that I'm worth that. And we just suddenly get ourselves in a real loop about it. And there's this idea that if you are selling something, you say the price, and then you wait, and basically the first person to speak loses. So you just have to wait, and that's what the price is. It's, if we were selling something like a car or real estate, we wouldn't have that emotional feeling. We would just say, well, that's what the price is. If they don't want it, then they can find that somewhere else, but it won't be the same. I think because we're working on our own often, as most photographers we're working on our own, we make the mistake of putting into our pricing how much effort that's taken rather than what's the value it's got. And people see the value, and as soon as you start mentioning the effort, then people are going to start to change it from a value judgment to, well, how much is she earning per hour for what I'm just about to buy? And that isn't what it's about. It's about what's the value to them. And that's much more difficult in like commercial. That's easy because they can see, right, we've got these photos. They could almost, if they had the right metrics, they could probably work out how much more income that these better photography assets are going to bring the business. So they can make a direct comparison. If that's more than they're paying you, it's a good bargain for them to have. With art, it's very different, and you need to sort of just let people think, what would that be worth to me to have that piece of artwork on my wall?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I hired like a consultant to work with me for a day, and we worked really extensively on my kind of thoughts and thinkings and feelings. It's just about money. Like, I grew up kind of poor, and I've always kind of looked towards people who have lots of money kind of negatively. And so I've had this weird relationship with money and people who have money. And it was really helpful for me to go through some exercises to kind of detach those emotional feelings about money, because at the end of the day, it's all relative. Like, there are people out there who think $2,000 is nothing, and there's people out there that $2,000 is like their entire life savings, or like they'll never even have $2,000. And so it doesn't matter. Like, you need to detach like your value of money and start to think about what something is worth to somebody else, whether they have $2,000 or $200 billion. It doesn't matter. Yeah. What you're doing is you're providing them with something that solves a problem that they have, and you have to think about what is solving that problem for them likely worth in their mind.
Because no one buys anything thinking it's bad value, do they? That's the thing. That's our biggest sales rejection. I think, this isn't good value to buy that. So if someone pays $20,000 for a piece of artwork, in their mind, that's good value to them. They're of a financial status where they can afford to do that. And it doesn't mean that we should feel bad about presenting that. There's this idea of, if you want to start increasing your photography prices, then the one way to do it is just change the prices on your website, and suddenly they're changed. That's it. Because you'll start appealing to sure, you won't appeal to the same people that were buying it last month, but you'll start to, appeal to people that are looking for photography artwork that have got more capital to spend on it. And it's like if you buy a TV, you might have a budget in mind. You might say, right, I've got $1,000. We've saved up. We're going to go and buy a TV. You won't even look at the ones that are $400, even if they're really good TVs, because you've decided that's your budget. You'll probably spend a bit more than $1,000 because you tend to spend a bit more than you've budgeted for. So by increasing your prices, you just appeal to people that are looking for a different price range.
Yeah, it's fascinating, that consumer mindset too, because like you said, for some demographics of people, if you were to say, yeah, my weddings are $40,000, that's what it costs, and here's all the ways I'm providing value to you, and XYZ, and people who have $40,000 to spend on a wedding photographer, if you were to price that at $5,000, that demographic of people is going to look at you and they're going to say, oh, it's cheap, it's not worth it. And even though it's the exact same service,
exactly, yeah, they'll make a value judgment on it.
Right. They're going to assume that it's not as good just because it's less money. It's wild.
Do you find that there's a because I'm well on board with this idea of just increase your prices, and I say to my people that do my wedding workshop, just increase your prices. If your branding, your website and your photography can justifiably hold that, if it looks really cheap, then it's just not gonna. It has to make sense as a whole package. But there then is a point, and I think that point's different everywhere in every country in the world. But there's a point by which people that will stop working, because if people want to spend, let's say, $20,000 on a landscape print for their wall, then they're probably going to they want one from Matt Payne or Joe Bloggs or whoever. They want to specifically go to that artist for that work. They're not going to be using Google to find artwork of that value. They want a known name. And I think it's the same with all photography, commercial and weddings as well, that once you get beyond a certain point, people are just looking for that particular photographer. They want her to do it or him to do it.
Yeah, I think so. And like we were going back to before in terms of how do you differentiate yourself? Like if I'm just going to use a random number, but let's say you have a print that's $2,000, and it's a 30 by 45 print on acrylic, and it's a pretty pedestrian scene that lots and lots of other photographers have photographed in the exact same way. How is that? Like, they're just going to look, if everything is equal, they're just going to look for the one that's most affordable.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's an interesting way to think about, like, it goes both directions, to your point. Like, it only goes so far to price your work really high. It still has to be coupled with quality and differentiation of some sort.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So totally shifting gears a little bit, but I think it's related in terms of some of our shortcomings as creative people. Why should we seek out a path of relentless improvement, and what does that even look like?
I think I've always had this idea that I think it came from, I was looking at a film or a TV show or something on Netflix, and it occurred to me that if you're an actor, you can only act. You need to. If you're an actor that wasn't very bright, which there's plenty of, right? We won't name any names. You can't. You're not going to be able to portray somebody that's really, really bright, that's really intelligent as a role. It's going to be very hard to do that because you don't know the things you don't know. And I think I figured it's similar to a lot of things, that if we can see, if we've got that ability. So, for example, if I'm looking at landscape photography, I'd like to spend more time doing landscape photography and see where I can see where, like, I could tell immediately looking through your this podcast website, the competition things. I see where I can see in every shot on there loads of areas where my landscape photography is not to that point, right? Really easily, and having the ability to see that is the same set of skills you need to be able to get there. And so if you've got this view of the ideal shoot being, this is what I always think, you finish the shoot, you create the images, whatever type of photography it is, the perfect outcome is that I'm really happy with this shoot. The client is going to love it, but there's tons of things I would do better next time. I think that's the perfect outcome in every way, because it means you're always getting better. You could always improve something. And if I think any of us ever get to a point where we're saying, right, yeah, photography, I've completed that, I know everything about it, then we stop improving. And I think with that becomes arrogance, and probably you probably lose passion in it. You would lose. I think that progress, always progressing through our work and making every photo, we'd always hope that every photo we've just taken is the worst we'll ever take again. And I think as soon as you think, no, I'm just taking the best photos ever all the time, I'm sure you must lose that drive and that motivation to keep doing it and keep working.
Yeah, and are you familiar with, like, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, like, at some point, I find this in photography very, very accurate, like, especially my own experience starting out as a photographer. Like, at some point, I had figured out everything the camera could do. I understood what aperture was. I understood shutter speed. I understood the exposure triangle. I thought I understood composition based on what, people online were saying you should know, right? Like the rule of thirds, like, oh, I'm good. I know how to do that. Mm-hmm. Cool. Right. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm the man. I know how to do everything in photography now. And then it's so funny because, and I think in all of our careers, hopefully, at least it was for me, you hit this point where you realize that none of that is actually true. Like that's like the baseline. Like you've hit the basement of growth, and now you can begin your journey of very slow, methodical roller coastery growth where you make gains and losses, and your photography slowly gets better, and you start incorporating different things that make your images a little bit better each time. And so I think there's that psychological hill that we have to get over first in terms of having a humbling experience or something that kind of grounds us that says there's much more room for improvement here.
Yeah, I think so. And I always think, do you agree with this, that there can be with that acknowledgement that, oh, I've got a ways to go yet, or, you know, that's where the self-awareness and the anxiety and the doubt lives. And that's why a lot of the best creatives, a lot of us are kind of racked with imposter syndrome and everything else. I see people all the time at various different, you know, events where we network with photographers that they've got none of that. They don't care, you know, they think they're nailing it. And with that becomes a confidence in wedding environments, certainly couples buy into, because they think, oh, this guy is just on top of his game. He's got no concerns at all about it. And so they're really successful. And you look at their work, and then that's another reason why very successful people can, photographers that aren't majorly skilled can be very successful, because they can work out a way to articulate what they love about it. And they've just got that blind confidence. They don't really realize that they're kind of out of their depth.
Yeah, I think there's a sweet spot too, though. And I've kind of embraced the fact and idea that there's always more room for improvement, or ways to get better, or different ways of seeing the world through the lens, or different techniques that I could try out, whether that be in image capture or in post-processing, whatever. And I know that I'm skilled enough to be able to go to pretty much any location in the world and come home with some images that I'm happy about, knowing that the next time I go back to that location or to a similar location, I'm going to make slightly better photographs. So I think for me, that's the sweet spot, is having that confidence, but also understanding or believing that there's always some way that you can become better.
What do you think's the best? What's your preferred way of being exposed to all these areas where you could improve? Is it looking at other work? I mean, you've run this competition. You must see a bunch of fantastic pictures that you can draw inspiration from. But if you didn't have that, what would you be doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one way to do it for sure. I mean, for me, it's definitely, my work has gotten a lot better through a couple of things. One, just having really awesome conversations with people like you on this podcast. I think ways that we can immerse ourselves in photography and having conversations with other people about their approaches, the way they see the world, maybe different techniques that they're using, whether that be not only just technical techniques, but also just like how they approach the craft in general. And then another big thing for me has been shifting my mindset. For years and years and years, I had very rigid mindsets about what I believed a good photograph was, and things were very formulaic. And if the clouds aren't in a certain way or have certain light, then it wasn't a good photograph. Or, you know, I was constantly one of those guys that would walk around and say, oh, it's bad light, we can't shoot today, this is no good, we'll just have to come back tomorrow and see if it's any good. And that mindset piece has been huge for me, to shuck that off and just have the belief that there's no such thing as bad light. There's better light for different types of concepts or subjects, but a good photographer can make a good photograph in any type of light if they understand how to leverage it in a certain way. So I think that shift in mindset for me has been really powerful.
Yeah, I guess so, because you've got, I suppose you've got that theory of with the perfect light, perfect scene in front of you, any photographer's, you know, unless they've completely taken a photo of their shoe or something, you know, they're going to capture a decent shot. It's going to look good because everything else is right. And it's when stuff isn't perfect that you have to dig a bit deeper. And I suppose for landscape photography, you're looking more at, there's more delicate tones here. How can I use those tones rather than the epic, you know, more classic kind of just belting sunset.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have the same things that happen to you in wedding photography all the time, where like there's harsh light coming through a window, or maybe the sun is way brighter than you thought it was going to be. So then it comes to like, okay, how can I get creative about placing my subjects in a location that is more favorable to the conditions, or maybe I need to use an external flash, or, like you start to think of ways that you can overcome those challenges to still be able to produce work, because the wedding's not going to wait for the sun to go in a different spot or the clouds to part or whatever. So, you have to bring a lot more to the game in order to produce quality photographs for your client.
Totally, yeah. And sometimes it's a bit too bright at weddings, but I think the last time that happened was 2009 in the UK. But so it's usually the oh man, it's cloudy. If it was any other shoot, you would put it off and do it a different day. But then that's when I find that I improve, is thinking, right, okay, I'm not going to get bright light, so I need some contrast. Am I going to use a bit of window light and make sure there's little splashes? There's always some spots of light somewhere. Is finding them and thinking, right, they're not going to get that beautiful sunny blue sky day shot that they may have seen. They're going to get something a bit more thought about, and it's going to take a bit longer, and it is going to be a bit, I have to dig a bit deeper to get it, and I'm going to need my flashes, and I'm going to have to use that to create some contrast in the shot. And all of those skills is what then you arm yourself with a toolkit, don't you, of all of those skills. So when you go into an environment, you've got all of those to rely on. And I think that does two things. It means that as a photographer, clients for a wedding, as an example, can see those photographers that have got real good skills with artificial light compared with those that don't. They can't see things like sharpness and image noise. They're not looking at that stuff, but they can see those differences. So being able to have those skills does mean you can elevate your brand in terms of the prices you're going to be able to achieve. But also I think probably more importantly, I can remember doing weddings before I had a good handle on, had a shoot when it wasn't good weather and had to use flash. It's so stressful. It's such a stressful environment to have knowledge that you don't have, and to go into it, and you can't admit that you don't have the knowledge, so you've got to kind of try and style it out somehow, and that's a really stressful place to be. So having all of these skills, you just know every shoot you do, you're going to be able to come away with something. It just may not be the thing that you thought about the day before. It's going to be something different on the day.
Well, and in landscape, it's easy, right? Because I can just go out on any day. I can experiment. I can fail a lot. I can realize like, oh, that didn't work. I need to do it differently next time. But in a wedding, like, it's much more stressful. So I would say for wedding photographers, it might make sense to try to become like a second shooter for somebody who's kind of got some of that stuff dialed in, where you can maybe fail a little bit more and see how someone else is handling the dynamic situation of whatever is happening that's challenging. And then, there's a little bit more room for error, but then you also can make those realizations with a little bit of a safety net.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I always say wedding photography is one of the few jobs. I can't think of another job where you have to turn up on the day, whether if you've broken your leg, you have to either go or send somebody else. If you're ill, you have to go. Because if you're a surgeon, you would just say, right, I'm really ill, I'm going to have to postpone this operation. But you have to turn up for a wedding. And it's kind of like somebody pre-purchasing from you let's say a 4 feet by 5 feet by 3 feet canvas of a piece of landscape photography. They bought it for $10,000, and then you've got to go on it. You've got to go and take the shot afterwards on a particular day, and you've got no choice. You have to get a shot that day. It's really stressful because you've got to fulfill that idea that they've got, that they've already paid for it, so they want to get the value. And so if you can't come back and say, yeah, it was a bit rainy, so we're going to do that a different day. And I think that having those sorts of things where you have to do it, I think does help. And things like second shooting, I always say I am in two minds about this, because some second shooting is really valuable, but I think it depends on your character. If you've got the sort of character where you're happy to immerse yourself in uncomfortable situations outside your comfort zone, then I think it's probably fine. I think it would. I definitely don't think that you should. You should always make sure that your client is aware of the experience you've got for things like weddings or commercial or whatever. Mm-hmm. I thought we wouldn't want to present something where we're pretending that we've done 100 weddings when it's our first wedding. But if they're happy to pay for it, that's up to them. But I know that a lot of photographers do find that situation extremely stressful, and things like assisting for a wedding, because assisting is even better in a way, because for a second shooter, certainly in the UK, the photographer is going to have to pay for that. And the couple would have to pay for that if they don't want that person there. But someone assisting, just being around as a pair of hands, helping out, observing how that photographer is working is really valuable. And I didn't do any of that stuff, and I just kind of just started out and just learnt the hard way in at the deep end. But what I've loved since then, I've done a few times where I've just done second shooting for other photographers, and it's a time where you're not in control of the main thing, so you haven't got the stress of managing all the different shots you're expected to get. So you can be a bit more creative. You can think, well, there's an example where I had a couple of really beautiful little flower girls that running about. They were so cute, these little girls, and they're running in and out of this maze. And I thought, if I just stand here and wait, I'm going to get the perfect shot. But it took me about 10 minutes to wait. And I know if I was the main shooter, I'd never have had the patience, because I thought, I've got to go and get some shots. I can hear people laughing, and you can hear the chinking of glasses, so someone's going to do a speech. So I'd have to have left it, but I could just focus on being creative for that one shot. And it's an opportunity you don't often get.
I love that. Well, Nick, winding things down, tell us a little bit about your career acceleration workshops and your landscape photography skills workshop.
Yeah, well, the landscape photography skills is, as I said, because I'm relatively, I've been not shooting for decades and decades. What I found is that there are a lot of photographers that have got a love for photography, but they're missing the technical aspects. So I teach those technical aspects of landscape photography, like composition, about bracketing, focus stacking, about how to edit images in Photoshop and Lightroom, and all of those techniques that mean when they go out and they get a good shot, they're going to have all those skills ready to be able to come away with something that's really spectacular, rather than something that, I wish we'd managed to, change that composition a bit. And so it focuses heavily on those areas, and it's just a really nice opportunity for me to be able to go out to a location with a few people. So we do half the day in the classroom, then half the day putting it into practice. And that's a great opportunity to get out, because what I've found, the one downside of being a professional photographer is that now when there's a sunset, I live on the north coast of Somerset in Britain, so we can get some spectacular sunsets. And I look out the window and I think, I can't be bothered. It's just I've got too much to do, because I know it's gonna add loads more photos to my queue of images to edit. And that's a real shame, because I used to love doing that. And doing these landscape tours is a great way for me to say, right, I've got to go do it. And I love it every time. And just being with other photographers, however long they've been doing photography, maybe 10 years or 2 months, I love to learn something from more. Everyone's got a different view. And that's why I think it's such a fascinating discipline, that somebody with no experience at all can just say, well, why don't we just get that and shoot in that way? And you think, yeah, we could do that. Wouldn't have crossed my mind to do that. And that's why I love having assistants with me at weddings, because someone's different point of view suddenly opens up so much more. And to be resistant to that is just basically shortchanging your own work, because you could really learn from that. The other things that are really popular is the business coaching stuff. So that's heavily focused on a lot of the stuff that I talked about earlier, around getting our businesses to where we want them to be, and the tools and techniques that we should have to allow that to happen, and to identify the reasons why it's probably not happening. And the other one is the wedding photography. And like landscape photography, I think it's important that I don't mandate how you take photos at a wedding. So we do a shot with a couple, but that's more about, look, this is the sort of shots that are going to really work well on social media. But I'm not saying, right, you should use this focal length, you should compose it this way, because that just creates I don't want loads of photographers that look the same as mine for a start. That's not good business. But that's not the important thing. We want people to find their own way. But it's all the other stuff. It's the how to market a brand, how to create a brand, how to be consistent to your own brand, how to communicate, the messaging, how to manage a wedding, how the workflows. There's so many things, accounts, finances. There's so many things that put off a lot of people even trying to do that, because it's just a wall of things that they don't even know they don't know. And so this workshop covers all of that, and it's a really popular thing to do, and it's something I love doing alongside actually shooting myself.
Love it. All right, Nick, so how can people learn about those different offerings?
If you head to my website, so it's www.nickchurchphotography.co.uk/photography education, or just head to the homepage. In the top right, there's a photography education button, and that takes you to an area of the site that's focused not for brides, but for people that want to learn about photography and improve their businesses. Also on Instagram, I've got the at Nick Church Photography, which is my weddings work, and there's at Nick Church Commercial, which is my commercial work. If I could mention, there's a Facebook group as well that I've set up, because I think that community aspect is something that I found I was missing from my old job, where you would just have chats with people when you're having a coffee or when you're in a meeting before the meeting starts, and they're sometimes the most valuable sort of bits of conversation that you can have. And I was kind of missing that, just sitting on my own all the time. So a few years ago, I set up this Nick Church Photography Collective Facebook group, which has just got loads of photographers and filmmakers of all different genres. And it's just a really good, we're all well in that area of relentless improvement. We're all trying to learn from each other, collaborate, work out what we can learn from each other. And it's just a really cool, inclusive group of people, because I find some Facebook groups are not like that at all. And so that's why I set it up. So yeah, so that's a place to hang out as well.
Awesome. And last question, Nick, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who is a couple of people that we should learn more about?
Yeah, well, there's a guy that I know called John Reese. Now, he's interesting because he is a doctor, so he's a surgeon, and he also runs a charity that's based in improving healthcare and living standards in Zanzibar, which has got some areas of very deprived areas in terms of healthcare. So him and a few other doctors have created that charity, and he started photography about the same time as I did, but fully in landscape. So he's a landscape photographer. I'm not sure if he's selling his work, but what I love about his work is it's really good work for a start. It's really, really pleasant to look at. But with his job and all the other things he's got, he can't do that. Oh, it's not great weather today, I'll try again tomorrow. Oh, that didn't work, I'll try again tomorrow. He has to dig something out of that one time he's there, because he'd be driving past somewhere on the way to the hospital. He knows he's got 2 hours, he has to get something there and then. So he gets something every time and just treats it in a different way. And he's got I think it's a really interesting way to do it, just to keep going to the same place when you're there, rather than having the ability to plan everything like that. So he'd be a good person to talk to, and yeah, really nice guy as well. The other one is a colleague of mine, so it's someone that I've shot with before. He used to shoot a few of my weddings, called Geraint Roberts. And yeah, he went to Japan last year, and he shoots a lot of films. We shot a lot of film. He shoots on film, so a lot of film photography in Japan, and all the different scenes and flora and fauna and landscapes in Japan. So yeah, he'd be and he's a funny guy so as well. So it'd be an interesting person for you to chat to.
Brilliant. Well, Nick, this has been a lot of fun, and thank you for taking time out of your obviously incredibly busy schedule to chat about all things photography.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Well, thank you to Nick for the great chat on this week's episode. I am sure that others have experienced some time in what Nick referred to as the death zone, and I'd love to hear your stories. Maybe you have a story of your own about how you've overcome some of the challenges that we all face as photographers. If so, please do reach out, and maybe we can record your story for others to learn from. Cheers. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.